First, I'd like to talk about the ADDIE instructional design. This model is kind of the standard procedure for all instructional models. For someone who's new or unfamiliar with the content area or of instructing, the ADDIE model is a very clear and concise model. It's very easy to follow, and although there are many variations of it, some a little more complex than others, the main 5 phases of the ADDIE model are analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. By using this model as kind of your base, as your guideline, educators can create an environment where the presentation of the material is laid out in a manner that's very direct and efficient. In the analysis phase, this is where the problem is identified and explained. The educator will collect prior knowledge and background from the learners. It shouldn't be forgotten to clearly express the goals and objective of the lessons, asking yourself, what's the purpose or the mission of this lesson, and what do I want to get across to my learners or students? In the design phase, this is where the presenter should create the planning. What is needed to be learned? What skills do my students need to grasp from the content, from my lesson? You'll look into what strategies, what types of instruction you'll use, how you will assess it, and how your students will learn this material. What tools will you use to assess it? What tools will you use to bring that content to the student and to the learner? The development stage is where the content comes to life, so to speak. The educator will write and design all the materials used in the lessons. You'll bring in all supplemental materials, any technology you would use, anything, any manipulatives, anything that can help the student grasp the concept. The implementation stage is your delivery of your content and testing to your students. How are you introducing this to your students? It's dependent on the content area and the setting and what goals and objectives you are teaching in your lesson and to the students. The evaluation stage is the last phase of the ADDIE model, and this is where the educator is looking back at what has taught, the content, the lesson, and deciding what went well, what could have gone better, and how can there be improvements made to the lesson. In the ADDIE model, they speak about that there are 2 parts in the evaluation stage, which are the formative and the summative. Formative is happening throughout the entire stage, throughout all stages of the model, so that you can be looking back and sort of modifying as you go to improve the learner's intake of their content, where the summative is conducted towards the end and you're assessing yourself on the lesson and how it could have gone better and what was retained or not retained to your learners. KEM's instructional design model is the second model I'll be speaking about. KEM's is based upon 9 different factors or pieces that are sort of at an ongoing state of evaluating the learning environment. It's a constant looking back throughout the whole lesson. How can this change? How can I move forward? Is this the correct way I should be moving for my students? There are 9 components, and the first one is identifying the specific objectives and instructional problems for your students. So this is very similar to ADDIE. The second is to consider the different learning styles for each student. Many students, special ed, you have your tactile learners, your auditory learners, and your visual learners. So using different technologies, different manipulatives for each student should be considered. 3 is to decide what content and tasks will be used to address your goals. What will work, what materials will work best during this lesson at that particular time. 4 would be to introduce the goals of the lesson to the learner. So state it, make it clear to them. Let them understand why they're learning this, what it's needed for. 5 would be to introduce the concept in steps that would be congruent and sensible for the learner, so it makes sense to them in the order that they're learning it. 6 would be to use strategies that will allow each learner to have a concrete understanding of the skill. So you might use a different strategy for different groups of learners in your classroom, depending on how large it is, breaking them up into what kind of learning style works best for them. 7 would be to design how you will present the content, how you're going to grasp their interest, what way speaks to your learners the best. 8 would be to identify how and what you will use to assess them. What tools will you use to assess them? Are you going to give them mini quizzes, things like tickets out the door? How will you evaluate if they learn that skill and if they're able to master it? And 9 would be the use of resources that will strengthen the content you presented. What can help reinforce that skill that you have just taught them? I enjoy this model because of the continual change throughout the lesson, and in special ed and day-to-day, it varies. One thing that worked one day in your class, one learning style, may not work the next day or with a particular content area. Your children's attitude changes. One student may learn in a completely different manner one day as they did the last day, depending on how they're feeling or the mood within the classroom or the setting. The Kemp model seems to focus more on how each individual learner can grasp the concept, whereas the ADDIE model seemed to be a more general overview of the design process. Kemp's model really took into consideration different learning styles of the students. I, in particular, have a student who works well and loves to do his independent work on the computer, where another student despises it and works very well side by side with me working a problem out on the board. So the Kemp's model really seemed to hone in on the specifics of each learner themselves. The last model I'll be talking about is Gagne's 9 events of instruction. Gagne's behaviorist approach really focused on the conditions of learning, where he addresses the 9 steps. I felt that when reading and learning about this model that it's very important for the teacher to be totally engaged with the students each step of the way, and that really kind of made the model about the teacher being there each step of the way, being completely involved with the student. The first step out of the 9 steps is to gain the attention of the learner. And when I read this, I really related this to the activating strategy we learn when we do our LFS lesson planning. So it's really, how can I get the student to listen to what I'm about to say? How can I really pull their attention in to make them want to listen to me and hear what I'm about to say? The second is explaining to the student the goals of the lesson. And again, this is just like within Kemp's, that you want the student to realize what they're going to learn and what they need to learn for those goals and objectives. 3 would be to get the students thinking about prior knowledge. What do they already know? And a lot of times students say, well, I don't know anything about what you're about to introduce to us. And I love handing out the KWL charts for them. And you can find out just the littlest things that they might know about the subject or might relate to the subject, and that can really kind of get their brains going and thinking on the topic. And then you can use this to go back and assess as an assessment tool that they can answer their own questions that they had in the beginning prior to the lesson. 4th would be to present the material that will engage the learner. I think about at the high school level, which I'm at, there are great things on YouTube now. Teachers are doing raps and skits on different subject areas in school, and they use language that the students can understand depending on the age of them, but they use songs or skits related to movies and songs that are out now and relevant to the student, and it kind of grabs their attention and they kind of want to learn and listen to what they're saying. 5 would be to provide and give students the direction. Let them know what you need them to do and what is asked of them. Let them know, this is what I want you to do, this is step 1, this is step 2, and so on. 6 would be to evoke the students to use these skills, to perform the knowledge through the tasks, whether it's group instruction or direct instruction one-on-one. Let them know that you'd like to see them use these skills once you present the content to them. 7 would be to provide the feedback to them. And no matter how my students are doing, I always provide that really positive feedback, whether they completely understand it or not, but just so that they don't get a negative feeling or negative taste in their mouth about, well, if I don't understand this now, I'm never going to get it. A lot of my students can really decide quickly whether they're going to like or dislike the content that I'm teaching them. So, acknowledge that the student's task work is going well, giving them guidance in their work, leading them in the right direction, checking that they're doing it the right way, or they're kind of going off in a different direction than what you'd like them to be on. Make sure they're understanding those concepts. 8 is to assess the performance, and that's where you'll examine whether the learner was able to grasp the content or not and to use those skills. And to do that, again, I do a little mini quiz or something like a ticket out the door, like you can't line up or you cannot leave the room until you give me one fact that you hadn't known that you now know about the content that I delivered today, or name one thing that was very interesting to you, or name one thing that you're still interested in learning more about. And this way I know that they were involved in the lesson and were able to grasp and take pieces of that lesson away. Whether they're able to understand it completely at that point or not, I'm able to know, okay, so they're really connecting with this part of the content, and it gives me an idea of how to continue on the next day. 9 would be to enhance the retention transfer. So use activities that are really going to help the students remember and retain what was taught, how they can take it out in another class and use it again, or use it in the community or at home. When I look back at this model, I really see how the teacher involvement in this model makes or breaks how well the students are going to do. Each step of the way, the teacher needs to really activate the learners' brains and get their heads spinning about what they're learning about and how you can constantly be pulling them into that learning environment so that they can grasp those skills.